Welcome to the third episode of our vidcast about Italian theatre at the Russian court. The makeup of the troupe and the collection of commedia dell'arte scenarios and intermezzi reveal that the company brought an essentially comic repertoire unconnected to celebratory occasions of the court in St. Petersburg. The choice of the plays based on easily recognizable theatrical situations and slapstick comedy dependent on the acrobatic and mimetic abilities of the actors was centered on works in which language was not a barrier for enjoyment despite being staged entirely in Italian. It is only thanks to the Empress's commission to translate them into Russian and German that the extant collection has come down to us. The translation into Russian was made by the court poet Vasily Tredyakovsky, while the German translation was by Jakob von Stehlen, professor of rhetoric at the Academy of Science. 100 copies of each were published by the printing house of the Academy of Science. Tredyakovsky used French as a mediating language, and the plays were first translated from Italian into French and then from French into Russian. In the увещание, that is to say, comment inserted at the end of the interlude Starik Skupoi, the Old Miser, Tredyakovsky informs the reader-spectator that the arias and duets have been translated from French, but are printed in Italian in a parallel Russian translation, following the will of the person who had translated them into French.
This is to bring to the attention of the curious reader that the arias and two-voiced melodies, which are given here in Italian, have been translated from the French. They are printed here in Italian at the request of the person who translated them from Italian to French, and who also insists that the same should be done for the other libretti as well.
It is possible to assume that the author of the French translations was one of the actors of the company. Perhaps Petr Pertice, who in 1764 would translate Diderot's Père de Famille. Among the 9 titles staged by the company, 4 intermezzi can be identified as Venetian or North Italian. Starik Skupoi, the Old Miser, based on Il Vecchio Amaro by Antonio Salvi and Francesco Gasparini. Igrok v carte, The Gambler at Cards, traceable to Il marito giocatore e la moglie bacchettona, o Serpilla e Bacocco, by Salvi and Giuseppe Maria Orlandini. Porsognac e Grilletta, Porsognacco and Grilletta, traceable to Monsieur de Porsognacco, Grilletta e Porsognacco, by Marquis Trotti and Orlandini. 3 interludes are of Florentine origin. Притворная немка, The Fine German Woman, traceable to La Finta Tedesca or Carlotta e Pantalone. Больным быть думающий, The Imaginary Sick, based on L'ammalato immaginario e Righette Don Chilone. Посадской дворянин, The Artisan Gentleman, based on L'Artigiano Gentiluomo or Larinda e Vanesio. 2 other intermezzi are Neapolitan. Подрядчик оперы в островы Канарийские, The Opera Impresario in the Canary Islands, based on L'Impresario delle Canarie by Metastasio and Domenico Sarro. Влюбившийся в самого себя нарцисс, Narcissus in Love with Himself, based on La Contadina, Don Tabarrano e Scintilla by Bernardo Saddumene and Johann Adolf Hasse. Numerous possible sources for interludes staged in St. Petersburg demonstrate that by the time they reach Russia, the genre was already well established in Italy. Venetian, Florentine, and Neapolitan intermezzi were so frequently performed outside their city of origin that not only they become repertoire favorites across Italy, they also came to form a significant part of the repertoire in some of the leading European operatic centers. The comic interlude, however, was a genre in which the personality of actor-singers was so important that it influenced the writing and arranging of libretti and music. The choice of works performed before the Russian audience must have been determined by and strongly oriented towards the talents of the singers Pietro Pertici, Alessandro Stabili, and Giovanni Dreyer. Indeed, some of the changes made to the original versions of the libretti aimed to emphasize their personalities. It is the case with the Starik Skopoi, the Old Miser, based on Il Vecchio Avaro, the first intermezzo written for Teatro Sant'Angelo in 1720 by Antonio Salvi, a Florentine librettist in the employ of the Medici family, and set to music by Francesco Gasparini, one of the most popular composers in Venice. The libretto remains largely faithful to the Italian version, except for the substitution of Fiammetta's entrance aria, Perché sia il bello il mondo, vi è chi sparge e chi raguna. For the world to be more beautiful, there are those who throw money around and those who take it up. That sets the action in motion by describing her intention to trick Pancrazio, a silly and greedy but wealthy old man, into marriage. The substitute aria "A me piace l'allegria e nel fare innamorata non sono tanto appassionato", I like happiness and to be a lover I am not so passionate, contains a play on the words innamorata, an adjective meaning to be in love with, but also the stock role of the female lover, the innamorata, in the Italian comedy. The word play is thus a meta-reference to the skills of the singer, probably Stabili, who was not successful in playing serious innamorata parts in the spoken word comedy, but excelled as a buffo singer. Similarly, in the Pritvornaya Nemka, the fine German woman, another interlude about witty maid willing to increase her status from marriage, Stabili alludes to her Florentine origins. Трудно, доктор, такого сыскать дурака, как этот. Искал он себе в служебницу одну немку, а я, хотя флорентийка, и притворилась немкой, чтобы войти к нему в дом. It is difficult to find another doctor so foolish as this one. He was looking for a German maidservant. Although I am from Florence, I find to be German to get into his house. Interestingly, in the original as well as all Italian revivals versions of La Finta Tedesca, the protagonist Charlotta has Bolognese origins. All evidence thus points to the fact that the singers must have traveled to Russia with their suitcases full of scripts and scores. The extant libretti of the collection are therefore not only some of the most important documents relating to the Italian-Russian opera, but they are also a heritage that can shed light on the circulation of Italian opera on a European scale. The lack of surviving musical scores frustrates most efforts to detail the history of the troupe's activities and the exact routes by which the intermezzi found their way to Russia. However, given that the text of the arias are printed side by side with the Italian originals, it is possible to verify how Russian libretti adhere to the Italian sources and make possible assumptions about how they reach St. Petersburg. Furthermore, because the roles in the comic intermezzo were predetermined according to sex and vocal range, the singers each had their own signature roles. That is to say, parts they had premiered elsewhere and which they brought with them from one performance to another. It is possible to figure out in those suitcases the libretti made their journey to Russia. One of the items that the singers of the second company possibly had in stock from previous productions is подрядчик оперы в островы Канарийские, opera impresario in the Canary Islands. The interlude L'impresario delle Canarie, presumably written by Metastasio and set to music by Domenico Sarro, was staged by the acts of Didona Abbandonata at the Neapolitan Theatre San Bartolomeo in 1724. Next year, buffo singers Gioacchino Corrada and Santa Marchesini took it on the tour to Venice, where it was performed with new music by Tommaso Albinoni and embedded in the new host opera Alcina delusa da Ruggero. Given that the production featured Giovanni Draia in the role of Ruggero, it is safe to assume that the Venetian version of the libretto traveled to Russia in the castratos suitcase. The Starik Skupoi, Posadzkoi Dvaryanin, the artisan gentleman, Muž Revnivy, the jealous husband, and Porsuniak and Grilletta, most probably came from the suitcase of Pietro Pertici, who specialized in the roles of old men in the comic intermezzi. Indeed, Pertici was the interpreter of Pancrazio in Il Vecchio Avaro, staged as enteracts entertainment in Salve's Lucio Papiro, staged in Lucca in 1724. Connecting each play with a particular singer's suitcase is, however, less rewarding than the conclusions that can be drawn from the above examples. First, not only did performance actively contribute to the importation of plays and manuscript scores, but in the virtual absence of a secular literary and dramatic tradition in Russian, they also found themselves in a position to decide on operatic repertoire. If the overall importance of singers in the economy of early 18th century opera is already well established, what the St. Petersburg experience of Italian operisti suggests is that their control over the system of production and their role in shaping the repertoire was much more decisive than has heretofore been understood. Second, repertoire was also disseminated through contacts between performers and the transmission of works from one singer to another. In fact, the enormously successful interludes, The Gambler's Cards, which is traceable to Il Marito Giocatore, with a libretto by Salvi and music by Giuseppe Maria Orlandini, one of the most influential authors of the Venetian opera, arrived in Russia with the first company. Its two extant translations, one in prose and the other one in verse for the use of the amateur theatre, testify to the intermezzo's great popularity with the Russian public. It was subsequently revived in 1734 by the second troupe, featuring Pertici in the role of Bacocco. The singer, who remained in Russia until 1738, even after the departure of the second company, was paired with the newcomer Rosa Ruvinetti-Bon, a comic actress in the third company, and the intermezzo was revived 3 more times. Given that the score and the libretti circulated with the same core group of principal singers who were responsible for and the beneficiaries of its success, it is no wonder that the interlude subsequently became part of Ruvinetti-Bon's suitcase, as she is known to have performed in Potsdam with her new companion Domenico Cricche. Similarly, Pertici's signature role of old man remained in his personal repertoire after his departure from Russia. When he formed a new intermezzo pair with his wife Caterina Broggi, he continued playing Vanesio in La Baronessa d'Arabella at the Teatro dei Signori Accademici in Cortona in 1738, Porsugnacco in Monsieur de Porsugnac, Teatro Sant'Angelo in Venice in 1741, and Dombrone in Il Marito Giocatore, Sant'Angelo, Venice, 1742. The intermezzo, влюбившийся в самого себя Narcissus, that is to say, Narcissus in love with himself, is another good example of how singers facilitated the spread of repertoire throughout Europe by exchanges libretti, scores, and even roles they had in their trunks with each other if it suited to the needs of a certain performance. The traveling singers thus played a crucial role in establishing the interconnectivity of theater networks, the cross-pollination of theatrical traditions, and the internalization of European opera repertoire.
La realtà è una realtà intrecciata dove le lingue e le culture si mescolano, ecco, soprattutto in grandi città, città-porto, città di passaggio, dove l'umanità era la più ampia e la più confusa. Quindi se uno andava a Londra ovviamente trovava persone di tutti i tipi e di tutte le provenienze che si mescolavano, a Parigi era lo stesso, in altri luoghi medesimamente, Venezia, basta girare per la strada e i toponimi veneziani richiamano il Fontego dei tedeschi, il Fontego dei turchi, il Ponte dei greci e così via, e quindi evidentemente l'Europa esisteva già da sempre, non è un'invenzione moderna, no? Adesso, vabbè, per carità, uno ha la moneta comune che mancava una volta, non è tanti anni che abbiamo, sono un ventennio che abbiamo la moneta comune o altri tipi di istituzioni, l'unità, la circolazione, la libertà di movimento, la mescolanza esistono dai tempi remoti o da abbastanza tempo e sono uno dei fenomeni caratterizzanti della cultura europea e della sua unità differenziata, diciamo così. Non ci stiamo spingendo a dire che tutto è uguale, no? Tutto è scandito in maniera differente, però tutto poi si riconduce a dei principi di scambio e di unità. In fondo, in questa storia, i comici italiani, gli attori, rappresentano un fenomeno di un'evidenza molto forte.